Welcome to the Task-Based Flight Test Series. Please welcome your host from Cleared Direct, Steve Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Well, I am Steve, and this is the Task-Based Flight Test Series, and this is episode 1, where we get into flight test prep, as well as fuel flow test. Fuel flow interruption is near and dear to my heart, as it caused my wife and I to have to ditch my first Bonanza in the Columbia River. As a reminder, there is episode 0, which is the introduction to this whole series. It sets the baseline, tells you who I am, what I built, so we could jump right in. Because I want to get this rig rolling because my shoulder is surgically repaired, healing fast, the weather is awesome, and the backcountry awaits. This is going to be the flow. I'm going to give you a note from my ombudsman. Then we're going to get into what I find to be the most important points of Advisory Circular 90-89 Charlie. So bust out your hymnal, follow along. I'm kidding. It's just going to be a quick review of the highlights. And then I'm going to get into some personal thoughts about the major milestones leading up to flight test, because we're not going to focus on those so much in this series, but I did want to give them the respect that they deserve. And just because I'm speeding through it doesn't mean I want you to speed through it. And there'll be a note from my lawyer as well. I have to watch what I say on this episode. It's a serious business flight test. But then finally, I'll brief up the fuel flow test. We'll execute it, and then we'll get into a quick debrief. So that's going to be kind of a negative split, right? In this series, we're going to really focus on the debrief most of the time, but in this, it's going to be heavy on some upfront items and then a very short debrief at the very end. So let's jump right in. My ombudsman wants me to tell you a disclaimer for this whole series, as well as my lawyers, right? This information is for reference only and is for entertainment purposes only. I do not accept liability for mishaps and claims of responsibility. All right, you are responsible for the safety of you, your aircraft, your passengers, your property, the property around you. You all know that. Lawyers, we good? Okay, from the intro episode, I forgot to mention my build time. I was talking about build time, 1,000 hours for this kit for experienced builders. I took about 1,500 hours since I built the avionics, learned how to do that, and wired it all up myself. That's a rough whack. If I were to take the over-under on 1,500 hours, I'd definitely take the over. Also, I wanted to mention the name of my airplane. It's the Backcountry Bogey, so if you hear me reference the Bogey, you'll know what the heck I'm talking about. And then lastly, tires, right? I'm kind of embarrassed how small these tires are. They're 21s. They came with the kit. They're getting chewed up in flight test, and that's the purpose, right? Just get better at tailwheel landings when I'm flying on pavement, getting chewed up. And I also want to see what the performance is with the 21s on there before I upgrade. All right, high-end airspeed. I want some baseline data to know what I'm giving up if I go to 26s or 31s. And I think the sweet spot for this airplane is 26 airstreaks is what I'm going to go to probably this winter. I'm going to take this time at the beginning of each episode to address errors or omissions I might have forgotten. So make sure you follow along with the next episode, and before you go do something that I told you to do, make sure I didn't correct myself in the next episode. I also want to talk about comments from the previous episode, and to spur some interaction with you guys, I'm going to pin the best comment, right? It's going to be totally subjective, and it's going to change. It's going to be the funniest. It's going to be the best tip, the best technique. It's going to be the best question, potentially. So I want this interactive. So make sure and get your comments out there, but make it quick because I'm going to film the next episode tomorrow. And so it's going to be a fast turnaround time. So that being said, let's take a look at the best comment from episode 0, the intro. I feel like I should point out you all are wonderful commenters. Thank you for all your comments, but I just picked this one. It's from @KLW141. Really excited for this new series. I just received my kit about 3 weeks ago, number 370. Awesome. And so I'm assuming it's a RANS S21. And I'm preparing to dig in. One question about your avionics build. Did you create your own schematics? What software CAD tool did you use? Yes, I did create my own schematics thanks to the help of my great friend, Jessica Veruda. She mentored me and taught me how to do it, gave me some resources. And I'm realizing I need to put together a full episode that really flushes out my avionics and how I did that. To answer the question, I used Adobe Illustrator to draw my interconnect diagrams. Congrats on the new project. Good luck with things. And thanks for the comment. We'll pin ya.
We'll pin ya!
So over to the advisory circular, once again, 9089 Charlie. If you're watching this much in the future, there may be a Delta Echo Foxtrot, but they don't come out that very often. So again, I'm just hitting the highlights here. You can get it on the FAA's website, and I'll leave a link. The first thing I want to point out is the first few hours, and I hit this on the first episode I did on task-based, right when this came out like a year ago, that there's nothing magic about 40 hours. And the EAA finally convinced the FAA with this chart, and they even put it in the advisory circular. 8 hours is that kind of magic point. So high risk, 8 hours, and that doesn't mean you can turn off your risk mitigation after that and relax. You're going to get comfortable about 6-7 hours in, but that 8 hours, let's keep it going through the entire flight test program. We'll just leave it at that. Okay, further on down here, the use of the task-based flight test plan is finally in this advisory circular. You're able to use this as long as you adhere to the advisory circular and the objectives of the task-based flight test plan, which we'll get to here in 1 second. And then you have to provide the specified logbook entry, which we'll also talk to, and then maintain the POH or the AOH on board the aircraft. I'm going to address it right now. I'm going to just say POH, okay? It's easier to say, and it's law of primacy, right? You got to keep that AOH on POH on board the aircraft following flight testing. The only thing that you have to have in your aircraft is your ops limitations, your weight and balance, and your registration. If I'm missing something, I'll try to update you guys. But those are the main 3 things that I'm focused on having on the aircraft until out of phase 1. Then, essentially take out your ops limitations and put in the POH. Of course, we're going to build that towards the end of the series. So I want to point out this. There's no requirement to create, submit, or use a formal flight test plan. It's wide open. However, the FAA strongly encourages amateurs builders to develop and utilize an individualized, comprehensive, requirements-based, operation-centric, task-based flight test plan appropriate for the complexity of the aircraft. Here's where I talk about retractable gear. I have a very simple airplane. Ground adjustable propeller, single engine, no turbo, no hydraulics, retractable gear, electric flaps. If you have any of those things, it's going to be quite a bit more complex. So tailor your flight test plan to your aircraft. The additional pilot program was hatched based upon there was a mishap, and the FAA was raking this poor soul over the coals for having a passenger with him during his flight test, and it turned out the NTSB goes, no, it actually benefited the safety of that flight to have that other pilot on board. Thus, the additional pilot program was born. I didn't use it, but absolutely look into it, and if it's applicable for you, that could be a great option if you're not quite feeling the flight test for yourself. Maybe you can ride along with your flight test pilot. Let me address that for a second. I didn't have a ton of time in the RANS S21. I had less than an hour. I only had about 13 hours in tail wheels. I'd say that was an added risk. I accepted that risk for sure. I've flown a lot of different types of aircraft. I was very current. I limited my crosswinds for the first few flights. So those are ways that I mitigated it. But don't feel pressure to flight test your own aircraft, please. Know your limitations. There's going to be 2 schools of thought. There's going to be people who are like, I wouldn't dare do that myself. And then there's going to be the confident people who shouldn't be. They're going to say that I'll be damned if anybody else flies my airplane first. So have a little bit of humidity, have a lot of safety forefront in mind, and we'll get into the first flight here. But I just wanted to kind of address choosing to fly with a test pilot. There's plenty of test pilots out there. I'm considering getting into it, although my wife doesn't like the idea of that. Jury's out on that. Here are the minimum flight test plan elements. I think these are kind of the objectives they were talking about earlier. It makes sense. We'll talk about weight and balance here in a second. The POH. It's nothing out of the ordinary. Engine run, of course, and then flight tests with flight test cards. So you're to create your own flight test cards. As a reminder, the EAA puts these out, but just make sure and tailor them to your own aircraft. You'll see me develop some. And I do want to say and point out this word right here, should, right? Flight test cards should contain at least the following. They do not have to. It's not will or shall. But, for example, I never wrote down my altimeter setting, item L there. But can I go back in my telemetry data and see what the altimeter setting was? Of course. And of course, I'm using pressure altitude anyway. Here's an example of a flight test card. If you don't want to buy the EAAs, there's an example of one. And they're pretty overkill. And you're going to be so busy, especially the first flight, handful of aircraft. You don't want to be writing things down. You don't want to be heads down for a lot of this stuff. So we're going to get into what we're recording, at least in the Garmin, and ways to start and stop a test so that you're not necessarily taking notes the whole time. And video helps. Hint, you can like wave your hand on a video if you're just scrubbing through it and go, oh, here's the start of a test. Here's the end of a test. So big fan of having video, especially because you can recreate and refine the data rather than just recollect. Okay, here's the required operating limitations. So they're going to restrict you to a geographical area. They're typically either 50, 100, or 150 miles. I convinced the guy to give me, Gary, to give me 100. I didn't even come close to it. But faster airplanes, they'll give you up to 150. Slower airplanes, 50. They're going to pretty much limit you to about 3 airfields. And I asked if I could take mine. What if the airfield is not an airfield and if I can land at a grass? No, he said it's not specifically addressed, but he said he wouldn't, so I didn't. And then of course there's going to be any other ops limitations. And again, carry this on your aircraft. Completion, that gets you into phase 1. To get out of phase 1, you certify and you write this in the aircraft logbook. I certify all these requirements, yada, yada. An AOH has been developed and placed in the aircraft. Here are the main speeds, center of gravity, and location, and where they were obtained. Sign your life away. And again, another time that I'll say it, you can still do the 40-hour fly-off via this terminology right there. Okay, that's about all the highlights I wanted to hit. I want to get into my experiences with some of these things leading up to the first flight. Engine break-in. I've seen resources say to run your engine at least an hour before your airworthiness inspection. The DAR is going to want to see that. No. So a brand new engine, right, needs to be run at high power settings to work off the honing, etc. I'm not going to get into details of that. Don't do it. Limit your engine run ground time at low power settings. If it's a brand new engine, of course. There's, of course, a lot more to the engine break-in, but I'll just go ahead and leave the episode where I did my engine first start there. Weight and balance. All right. I'll leave a link to the weight and balance episode up here, but the big picture is you're getting some scales, hopefully certified, and you're going to want to weigh it all 3 points, unless you've got a weird non-standard configuration with more than 3 wheels, thinking about like on floats or something, but you want to get it into flight attitude, which is a little bit more tricky if you've got a tail dragger, of course. I'm going to pull up my weight and balance so you can see this. All right, here's some of the elements and just some gee whiz numbers. Weighs 1075, and here's the empty CG. I'll point out that this is a very important line written in very small font. I'll go ahead and zoom in. But the acceptable center of gravity is 31.72 to 41.92 from datum. Datum is the front of the firewall. So if you'll notice something here, 31.72, my empty CG is actually in front of that. That's okay, because unless you're Trevor Jacob, you are not flying this aircraft without a pilot on board. So your pink body there is going to bring this aircraft, especially these low inertia light aircraft, into CG spec. And then of course, any sort of fuel is going to help yourself out with center of gravity. So I wanted to show you how that looks when I import that into ForeFlight, and it looks pretty similar in the Garmin G3X Touch. If I didn't mention it already, the Garmin G3X Touch does satisfy the requirement of having it on board, but I'm going to plan on doing a few iterations of these weight and balances at my standard configurations so that I'm covered, and I'm putting them in the POH and I have them on board the aircraft at all times for redundancy. So, there's only so many ways you can load up this airplane with 2 seats and X number of pounds in the baggage area. So that's one technique, but I wanted to point out that this is a rectangular, this actually looks pretty square, but we'll just call it a rectangular center of gravity envelope, right? So what we're looking at, here's the X-axis. Again, I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, but just as a review, here's the center of gravity inches, the acceptable envelope, right? So imagine this is this, you're looking at an airplane at the side, and the firewall's up here. Here's the front edge of the acceptable envelope. Here's the aft edge of the acceptable envelope. The tail is over here. Okay, so all in here, we are good. The y-axis, this is your empty weight, and then here's your max weight, 1,800 pounds in my case. So my basic empty weight with me on board and no fuel is going to be right there. As soon as I start adding stuff, it's going to go back this way. But taking a look at all these numbers, or actually crunching all these numbers, the cool thing is I cannot overload this aircraft or out the back end of the CG envelope because of baggage limitations. So the aft baggage arm weight limit is 67 pounds, and then the forward baggage limit is 113 pounds. So if I adhere to both of those, and then max up the passenger and fuel load, there are going to be times when I can hit the top edge with fuel and baggage, but there's going to be no opportunity for me to hit the back edge, which is good. But it was a challenge in flight test, and we'll get there. But I wanted to show you another aircraft that doesn't have a rectangular center of gravity envelope. Let me just pull it up here. This is my Bonanza. This is a 1964 S35 Bonanza. So my basic empty weight is just above 2,100 pounds, and then the max structural weight and max takeoff weight is 3,300 pounds. And so you can see that if you load up forward, you're going to be out the max weight, unless you put stuff in the back. Now you gain the max weight of 3,300 pounds, but it's a lot more limited. This is a utility type aircraft, so you can load it up a lot, but at the trade-off of having a smaller max gross weight center of gravity. So that's an example of an envelope that is not rectangular. Quickly back over to the bogey for my last point on center of gravity is, for the first few flights, you want to be in the first, talking percentage of that envelope, first 22% to about 30% aft in that envelope. So kind of in this regime here, this is the safest regime. You could probably have it right on the front edge, but anything touching the envelope, you really don't want. So right in through here is going to be your place you want to make your money on the first few flights, till you start expanding the envelope, taking risk mitigation steps as you go further and further aft on the envelope and higher up in the weight portion of the envelope. So just wanted to point that out for planning your flight test. I'm not going to say too much about the airworthiness inspection. It's going to depend on your own DAR. Communicate regularly with them, and I'll leave the link to my episode on airworthiness inspection. So the record keeping discussion. There's a great chapter or section on record keeping in the EAA flight test manual, and I'll only add my perspective quickly. So don't think of record keeping as helping yourself out. Think of it as helping your lawyer out if you crash the plane, and then also your kids 60 years down the road. Sorry if that was dark, but your grandkids 60 years down the road, they've got a great picture of what this aircraft is, because this airplane's, only a little bit of luck is going to outlive all of us. I mean, I'm flying a 1964 Bonanza, which is 60 years old, quite a bit older than I am. And it seems like I'm catching up to it, though. I don't know how that works. But I am so glad to have full, accurate records. Now, if that's not enough to convince you to keep good records post airworthiness inspection, then maybe this will. It'll add tens and tens of thousands of dollars of value to this airplane if you don't keep it in the family and want to sell it. I think a lot of you know this, but I'm not going to assume that you do. Having accurate, meticulous records is valuable. Okay, enough said on that. Making the mental transition between, for me personally, I did not take great build log notes. I just essentially took the paper copy of the instruction manual building this airplane and just put the date next to each step. I also had a YouTube channel, which I think helped my DAR prove to him that I did build 51% of this aircraft, and that's important in accomplishing that. The EAA has a wonderful website where you can track your build log and add pictures and track your hours. I recommend doing that if you have the patience. I was busy filming and not doing that, but I made it through. If you're an A&P watching who's got a resource to reference for logbook entries, I'd love it if you share it. So in the comments down below, and perhaps next episode, I'll pin you. Okay, the last thing is your fuel flow test, and that's actually test card 0 in the EAA test cards. Your Airworthiness Inspector, DAR, is going to ask for a proof and what your fuel flow results are. This is me preaching a little bit, but fuel flow interruption is near and dear to my heart, as it caused my wife and I to have to ditch my first Bonanza in the Columbia River 4 years ago this week. So, in fact, the NTSB just wrapped up, I don't know if just, but about a year ago, I finally checked again, and they had wrapped up the investigation. And hint, it wasn't me not having fuel on board. And I really need to debrief you guys, and I promise I will. But let's put a pin in it for now, if you don't mind, and I'll reattack this in the winter. Suffice to say, fuel flow test is vital for safe operations. To further prove it to you, let's take a look at a Kit Planes article here that shows, here's the article. I've got it pulled up right here. The number of accidents over the years is going down, which is great, but it's not zero, right? Fuel systems issues seems like the majority of the builder error issues that are going on. Another source of data is back in the advisory circular. I'll point out to you, you can read this article, but they took a look at instances of engine power losses during the first few hours, and the finger is pointed at fuel systems. So I'll leave it at that. But let's get into the actual briefing of how we're going to execute this. And this is way down, as you can tell. This is like page 52 out of 130 pages of this thing. But this is kind of giving you some good guidance on how we're going to execute the fuel flow test. And you're going to start with actual fuel capacity. You want to determine what your usable and unusable fuel is by draining it. I'm not going to get in a lot of detail there. Suffice to say, my fuel drained dang near completely out. So, but I'm going to go conservative, and I'm giving the plane a useful or unusable fuel total of 3 gallons. Okay. And if I ever use dipping into that extra 3 gallons that I might have on board, things have gone really, really wrong, but I want it conservative rather than the other way around. You're going to set up your aircraft and at least an angle 5 degrees above the highest anticipated climb angle, drain the fuel, and whatever fuel you don't have left is your unusable fuel. All right, but we're going to jump right into the fuel flow. You're going to take your personal precautions, which we'll talk to on my test card. You're going to tie down and chock the aircraft. There's a difference between the types of fuel systems, unpressurized and pressurized. So high wings, a lot of the time, and carbureted engines typically don't have a pressurized fuel system. Think Cessna 152. And then, of course, the injected motors have to boost that. So they've got a engine-driven fuel pump, and then, of course, a fuel boost pump on top of that. So we're kind of replicating, at least in my case, we're replicating that your engine-driven fuel pump fails on takeoff. You hit your boost pump. Is it enough to feed the engine and climb away from the ground safely? So that's the objective here. There's going to be 2 formulas, one for the unpressurized fuel system, one for the pressurized. And here's the chart. Some, fast forward through the formula, 100 horsepower fuel flow rate for gravity fed system, looking for 13.75, pressurized 11.49. So a lot of numbers here. Let me just show you my test card. Tail number, what the test is, the date I executed it, who I am, and then I had an observer, my son, and then the objective risk I just assessed was fairly low, as long as we adhered to safety mitigation to deal with these threats. We mitigated it through extinguishers, personal protective equipment, ventilation, buddy system, and then no limitations. So procedures, you can read these. I will point out, and we're going to see this in the video here, me doing all these things, aircraft and climb attitude, timer ready. You're going to see some kind of redneck, just me filling up a half-gallon jug with fuel. So again, it doesn't have to be super technical, but you got to get it pretty close. And I repeated the test 3 times to ensure that I was getting accurate data. So on to the formula. So here's the 180 horsepower engine. And then from the advisory circular, I kind of made my own formula here. So there that is. And you're converting it, from gallons to pounds and hours to seconds here. So that's what that all does. And that's what the minimum fuel flow pressurized system for 180 horsepower is, by my math, is 20.6. So as long as we're well north of that, I'll be happy. With that being said, let's roll the tape. Got a gallon jug right here. I've got a half gallon of water I measured at home. And so I'm going to transfer the half gallon into the gallon to mark the half gallon spot on this half gallon, or on this 1 gallon jug. We'll mark it with a Sharpie. We'll drain all the water out. And then this will be our test jug for the fuel flow test. I'll be careful not to mix any sort of water and fuel and put it back in an airplane, so that's one thing we're cognizant of. Okay, we've got exactly 1/2 gallon, which makes sense. Looks like about a half gallon. So we'll take a Sharpie, we'll mark it right there, and that'll be our test jug to measure. We could do a full gallon, I suppose, but it's just more efficient, quicker to do a half gallon, as well as I don't want it to get super full during this test. All right, that leaves a lot of room for sloshing around right there. The thing we are gonna do to increase accuracy of this test is we're just gonna repeat it multiple times. Cheers. Got it marked. Don't want to waste good water, so we need to dry this out as best we can, but we got our mark. Okay, throttle mixture in, fuel cutoff valve closed. This should just help everything drain out, and then of course that's going to be closed for now. We'll reopen it before the test. And then Kellen, if you could hold this. And then I'm going to, I got to glove up first, and then we're going to drain it. Ready, set, go. Dude, right at like 34 again, so that was pretty consistent. It was like 33 and a half, that was 34, so we're right in there. Should we do one more for good measure, or was that good? I'm happy. Sure. Oh. You want to do one more? It's kind of fun. All right, we'll do one more.
Okay, I'll dump it into the
The reason I'm having him dump it into the bow and not back into the bogey is that I need to drain some of this fuel to do the weight and balance, which is coming up in a couple days. So this is a good way to transfer fuel. All right, super happy with that. Backside of the napkin math, a half gallon every 30 seconds. That's 60 gallons an hour. That is well over what we need. Flying the big bore IO 520, 285 horsepower, I never see 60 gallons an hour. Holy smokes, most I see is maybe 35, 40 at sea level and takeoff. So I think we're going to be just fine. So that was a successful first test. Thank you so much to Kellen for his help and being safe. That's always number one on our mind, especially when kiddos are helping out. Okay, welcome back to the debrief. Let's jump right in. Here's the data we collected from today. I averaged it out to be 33.8 seconds to fill a half gallon jug. Did the math via this formula right there and found 53.2 gallons per hour. And that is more than twice the minimum fuel flow. So super happy test. I wanted to ensure that the battery unplugged. Okay, so fully charged, but unplugged battery, not on the charger. Why is that? Well, I guess I'm trying to replicate worst case scenario. So not only did my engine driven fuel pump fail, but my alternator failed. And now my And my electric boost pump is powered only by the battery at 12 volts, not the 14 volts. So I probably could have gotten a higher fuel flow rate with it at 14 volts. Didn't care, don't care, because I'm never going to see that fuel flow, hopefully at all. Flow restrictors, even if there's a leak. Anyway, that's more detail I want to get into. So did we achieve our test point objective of collect accurate electric boost pump output data flow? Yes. My DAR just asked me, did I do it? I had the proof that I did it via my video on my phone. And then of course I had the bogey test card right here. All right, guys, let's quickly recap this episode. Hopefully I incentivized you enough to interact, leave some comments, be funny, ask your questions, and leave your techniques. And I'll obviously very subjectively, I'll pick my favorite comment and I'll pin it. And we'll talk about it in the next episode. And I'm not going to limit myself to just that. I'll talk about all the best comments. But make it quick because I'm recording the next one tomorrow. Of course, I'm always eager for constructive feedback on the format, the content. So we talked about what I find to be the most important points of the advisory circular, some personal thoughts on the major milestones leading to flight tests, since I just went through this process myself. We briefed, executed, and debriefed the fuel flow test quickly. If you like the logo or want to help rep the channel, I would love it if you bought some merch. Proudly wear merch at Oshkosh. I would love it. Clear.direct, simple website. Go there. In episode 2, we're going to accomplish the first flight, so it's going to be a ton of fun. Until next time, I'm Steve, your Clear Direct.